My father isolated, and I was cheated into homelessness. I deliver revenge and reclaim our legacy. My name is Noel Hart. I'm 26 now, and I've learned that memory isn't a river. It's a collection of tide pools, little pockets of the past left behind. You can't change what's trapped in them, only how the light hits them when you dare to look back. Growing up in Aurora, Colorado was a lesson in beige. Our house was a 1980s split level with beige siding, beige carpets, and a front lawn that my dad treated with religious fervor. We were solidly middle class. We weren't hurting, but we weren't Santa Fe Hills rich. My dad, Graham Hart, ran Heartline Freight. It was his baby, built from a single-used flatbed into a respectable fleet of a dozen trucks that snaked through the Rockies. He was a man of routines. He smelled like diesel, strong black coffee, and the faint dusty scent of paperwork. He was steady. He was the anchor. But my mom, Lydia, she was the soul. Our house was just a box until she walked into a room. She was the one who filled it with the scent of baking bread on Saturdays, the sound of a piano playing pieces too complex and beautiful for our small living room. She was the color. She was the one who remembered the important things, the name of my fourth-grade teacher, the way I liked my sandwich cut, the exact shade of blue I loved. She was the gravitational pull of our family. Then there was my grandfather, Silas Whitmore, Mom's dad. Silas was from a different world. He lived in Santa Fe Hills, a place I imagined was paved with turquoise and gold, not the cracked concrete I knew. He was a real estate and investment magnate. Dad always used that word, magnate, and it always sounded like he was swallowing something bitter when he said it. Silas was a quiet man, built like a mountain and just as silent. He didn't speak often, but when he did, his voice was a low rumble that made you listen. He adored me. I was his only grandchild, the last piece of his daughter in the world. While Dad was balancing the freight ledgers, Silas would fly in on a private jet and take me to the biggest toy store in Denver. He'd stand there, towering in his expensive suit, and just say, "Point." For my 10th birthday, he gave me a gift that baffled my dad. It was a first-edition leather-bound set of the Chronicles of Narnia. It must have cost a fortune. I remember Dad holding one of the books, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, his knuckles white as he felt the heavy embossed cover. "Silas, this is too much," Dad said, his voice tight. "She'll ruin it." "Nonsense, Graham," Silas replied, not even looking at him, his eyes on me as I traced the gold lettering. "She deserves good things. She needs to know what they feel like. I just don't want her to get spoiled," Dad muttered, more to himself than to Silas. "I don't want her to think life is this easy." Silas finally looked at him. "It's not about easy, Graham. It's about value." I didn't feel spoiled. I just felt seen. I felt like he understood the parts of me that loved old books and quiet, beautiful things, the parts that were more like my mother than my father. The light in our beige house began to dim when I was 14. It started with Mom forgetting words, simple words. She'd be in the middle of a sentence, her hand fluttering, a look of sheer panic in her eyes as she tried to grasp for spoon or window. Then came the headaches, blinding migraines that left her pale and weak. Glioblastoma. The word itself was ugly, a tumor that was aggressive and insidious. Our life dissolved. The beige split level became a way station between hospital visits. The smell of baking bread was replaced by the sterile, chemical bite of antiseptic wipes. The piano fell silent. Silas arrived. He didn't just visit, he mobilized. He descended like a one-man army. His quiet voice now sharp and commanding on the phone. He flew in specialists from Johns Hopkins, from Mayo. He got her into experimental trials that our insurance wouldn't dream of covering. He paid for everything. A quiet, insistent flow of money that Dad, his pride choking him, couldn't refuse. The living room was converted into a high-end recovery suite for the days she was home. Silas paid for private nurses. He paid for organic meal deliveries. He was trying to buy time, to buy a miracle. "Whatever she needs, Graham," I heard him say to my dad one night, his voice raw. "Whatever it costs." Dad just nodded, his face gray. He hated it. He hated the obligation. He hated the constant, crushing reminder that all his hard work, all his trucks on the road, couldn't stop this. He couldn't fix his wife. But Silas, with his endless checkbook, was going to try and buy her life back like it was another piece of real estate. The experimental drugs bought us 6 more months. 6 brutal, heartbreaking months of holding her hand as it grew thinner, of reading her old books to her as her own words vanished completely. The funeral was a blur of black suits and a cold, driving rain. The sky was crying, so I didn't have to. The first crack, the real fissure, wasn't in me. It was between the two men who were left. Back at the house, the air was thick with the cloying scent of lilies and baked hams brought by neighbors. I was hiding in the hallway when I heard them in Dad's office. "You shouldn't have pushed for that last trial, Silas." Dad's voice was gravel, broken. It was torture. She was in pain. "It was hope, Graham," Silas countered, and I'd never heard his voice so sharp. It was a blade. It was a chance. "You were ready to let her go." "I was ready to give her peace," Dad roared, and a glass slammed on the desk. She was done. "But you couldn't stand to lose. You just wanted to throw money at a problem you couldn't fix." "And you," Silas shot back, his voice dropping to a dangerous, cold level, "were content to let her slip away because your damned pride wouldn't let you ask for help until it was too late. You wanted to do it all yourself." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a bridge burning. It was the sound of a door slamming shut between two worlds. After that day, Silas was gone. Dad cut him out. He returned the check Silas sent. I found one torn in half in the trash. He blocked his calls. I tried to call my grandfather once from a friend's phone. He answered, heard my voice, and there was a long pause. "Your father needs space, Noel. I'll wait." But he never called back, and I was too scared of Dad's anger to try again. I was 15. My mother was gone. My grandfather was exiled. I was stranded on an island with my father, and we were both drowning. I became an adult overnight. I packed away Mom's clothes, the scent of her fading from the fabric. I learned to make grocery lists, to pay bills, to navigate the profound, echoing silence of our empty house. Dad, God, he tried. He really did. He was a man built for logistics and freight manifests, not the complex emotional world of a grieving teenage girl. I'd come downstairs for school, and he'd be standing in the kitchen, a comb in one hand and my hairbrush in the other, his phone propped on the counter, playing a YouTube tutorial on how to French braid. The braids were always lumpy, the elastic snapping by noon. But he tried. He learned to cook. He found Mom's recipe box. His first attempts were disasters. Pasta boiled into a starchy mush, chicken charred on the outside and raw on the inside. But he kept at it. He kept her favorite mug clean, right by the coffee maker, just where she always left it. He kept her alive in these tiny, heartbreaking rituals. We were a broken two-person team, healing slowly, clumsily. The loneliness in that house was a physical thing. It had weight. It sat on Dad's shoulders, and I could see it crushing him. About a year and a half after Mom died, he started staying out later, checking on the night fleet. He'd say, "New driver." Then he mentioned her. Miranda Vale, a waitress at the Iron Skillet, a 24-hour truck stop diner out on I-70. "She has a really friendly smile," he said, staring into his coffee cup. That was it, a friendly smile. She was the opposite of my mother. Where Mom was quiet and graceful, Miranda was loud and sharp. She wore bright synthetic colors, hot pinks, and electric blues that hurt my eyes. Her laugh was a harsh bray that bounced off our walls. She smelled like cherry-scented hairspray and cigarettes. She wasn't alone, she had 2 kids. Cade, 17, was a sullen lump of restless energy, his headphones a permanent attachment, his eyes always glued to a screen. And Bree, 15, my age. Bree was a ghost, a quiet, watchful shadow who flinched every time her mother spoke. Dad married Miranda at the courthouse. It was simple, he said, efficient. 1 month later, they moved in. The quiet beige house I had shared with my father exploded. It was suddenly full of noise, full of new people, full of their things. "We're a new family, Noel," Miranda chirped, clapping her hands together. "Isn't this wonderful? A fresh start?" A fresh start. I learned quickly that a fresh start meant a total erasure of the past. The first thing to go was the piano, Mom's piano. It was an antique, a baby grand that had been her grandmother's. "It just takes up so much space," Miranda announced, measuring the wall for a new flat-screen TV. It was sold for a fraction of its worth. Then the photos. It was subtle at first. The large, beautiful wedding portrait of Mom and Dad that hung in the living room was replaced by a generic, mass-produced canvas of a sunset. "This just brightens up the room so much more. Don't you think?" Miranda said, not asking. The small, silver-framed photos on the mantelpiece. Mom laughing in the garden, Mom holding me as a baby, Mom and Dad on their 10th anniversary. They vanished, one by one. They were replaced by photos of Cade at a dirt bike rally, Bry at a middle school dance, and a new glossy family portrait of the four of them taken at a mall studio. I was in that photo. I was standing at the very edge, my smile as fake and stiff as the painted blue sky backdrop. The last photo of my mother, the one of her and me at the zoo, was on my bedside table. I started sleeping with it in the drawer, just in case. Our house, the one that used to smell like baking bread and old books, now smelled like Miranda's floral body spray and the burnt cheese scent of the snacks Cade microwaved at all hours. The change was absolute. The quiet, healing silence I had shared with my father was gone, replaced by a loud, invasive static. And Dad? He just seemed relieved. He was so terrified of being alone that he mistook the noise for life. He smiled at Miranda, laughed at her loud jokes, and didn't seem to notice the walls becoming bare. I felt the first real terrifying chill of what was to come. I wasn't just grieving my mother anymore. I was grieving my father, too. He was sitting right across the dinner table, but he was already gone. The moment my father's truck pulled out of the driveway, Miranda's face would change. It was an almost imperceptible shift, like a light switching off behind her eyes. The saccharine smile she saved for him, the one that said, "I'm just so happy to be here, Graham," would melt away, replaced by a flat, appraising stare. "Noel, honey," she'd coo, as Dad kissed her goodbye, her arm looped possessively through his. "Noel," she'd snap the instant the rumble of the diesel engine faded. Her voice, stripped of its sweetness, was sharp and metallic. "Your chores now, and clear your father's mug. You know he hates leaving them." She was right. I did know. I used to be the one who had his coffee ready. Now I was the maid service for a woman who wore my mother's apron. The invasion was methodical. It was a blitzkrieg on our history. The living room, which had been our quiet sanctuary of grief, was the first casualty. Before, it was muted tones, Mom's overflowing bookshelves, and the soft worn armchair where she read to me. After, it was a shrine to synthetic fibers. "This old stuff is just depressing, Graham," I heard her murmur to him one night. "We need a fresh start. New energy." New energy arrived in a truck from a rent-to-own furniture store. A massive black microfiber sectional that smelled like chemicals replaced Mom's sofa. The antique piano was gone, and in its place sat a 70-inch television, always on, always blaring. The walls, once a soft beige, were painted a jarring Tuscan gold that made my teeth ache. And the mantelpiece, the shelf that held our family's story, Mom and Dad's wedding, my first day of school, Mom holding me in the hospital, was wiped clean. The silver frames vanished. In their place, Miranda arranged a series of plastic, glitter-encrusted frames, Cade on a dirt bike, Bree in a stiff prom pose with a boy I'd never seen, a large studio portrait of Miranda, Cade, and Bree smiling triumphantly. Dad was added to this collection later in a new photo where he looked slightly bewildered, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I tried to save one, a small, simple photo of Mom in her garden, laughing, her hands covered in dirt. I put it on my nightstand. The next day, it was gone. When I asked Miranda, she just shrugged, her eyes cold. "Must have gotten lost in the shuffle, honey. We're spring cleaning. Out with the old, in with the new." My own room became the next front. I was 16. Privacy was the only thing I had left. "Bree is feeling a little cramped in that tiny guest room," Miranda announced at dinner. "It's not fair to make her feel unwelcome. You'll be sharing. It'll be fun, like sisters." Bree moved in, her eyes fixed on the floor, carrying a single duffel bag. At first, it was just that, a girl sleeping in the twin bed we'd brought up from the basement. But Miranda didn't just want Bree in my room. She wanted me out. Bree's things began to multiply, funded by my father's wallet, a new desk, a new laptop. Posters of bands I'd never heard of covered my walls, thumbtacks piercing the paint. Her clothes, smelling of Miranda's cherry vape-scented detergent, overflowed from the closet, piling up on the floor, on my desk, on my bed. I was being methodically squeezed out. Within a month, I was sleeping on a cot at the foot of my own bed, which Bree had claimed as hers. I had become a guest in the last corner of the house that was mine. Then went my father's study. It was his sanctuary, the one place that still smelled like him, like coffee and diesel and old paper. It was where he ran Heartline freight. It was where he'd retreated after Mom died, the one room I could find him in. Cade, who had just turned 18, decided he was going to be a music producer. "The basement is too damp for his equipment, Graham," Miranda insisted. "It'll ruin the electronics. Your office has the best wiring." I watched, numb, as they moved my father's heavy oak desk, the desk he inherited from his father, into the garage to be covered in tarps. They ripped out the built-in bookshelves. Cade and his friends tacked up cheap black acoustic foam covering the walls. A massive new computer rig, mixing boards and speakers were installed. The quiet hub of Heartline Freight became a recording studio. A constant dull thump, thump, thump of a synthesized bass line now vibrated through the entire house day and night. My father, the man who demanded quiet to check his ledgers, now did his paperwork at the kitchen table, squinting under the harsh fluorescent light, while Miranda chattered at him and Cade's music shook the floor. I finally broke. It was a Tuesday. I came home from school to find Cade sitting on the front porch, smoking next to a cardboard box. Inside the box were my mother's gardening trophies and her collection of landscape design books. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Cade just blew smoke rings. Mom's cleaning out the attic. Garage sale this weekend." I grabbed the box and stormed inside. Miranda was in the kitchen, humming as she read a celebrity magazine. "You can't sell these," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "These were Mom's." Miranda looked up, her expression one of mild annoyance. "Noelle, it's just clutter. We're a new family. We need to make room for our memories, not just old ones." "These aren't old ones," I shouted, the volume surprising even me. "This is my mother. You've taken her pictures. You've taken her piano. You've taken my room. And now you're selling her life for pocket change." Miranda's face hardened. "You watch your tone, young lady. This is my house now. And frankly, it's unhealthy for you to cling to all this grief. It's time to move on." "Don't tell me to move on." I was crying now, hot, angry tears. "You're not my mother. You're just erasing her." "Graham!" Miranda shrieked, her victim face snapping into place just as my dad walked in, his shoulders slumped from a long day. "Graham, she's screaming at me! I was just trying to clean up and she attacked me." Dad looked at me, his face exhausted. He saw the box in my hands. He saw Miranda's fake tears. He saw the mess of Cade's studio bleeding into the hallway, and he made his choice. "Noelle," he said, his voice flat. "Stop. Just stop. Miranda is right. We have to move forward. It's been 2 years. Learn to move on, honey." That was it. Learn to move on. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't defending Mom. He was defending his new peace. He was defending the woman who made his coffee and kept the silence at bay, no matter what it cost me. I picked up the box, walked past him, and locked myself in the bathroom, the only room that still had a working lock. I hid the box under the sink behind the cleaning supplies. The final act of replacement happened a few months later. Dad called me to the kitchen table, the one now covered in his freight manifests. Miranda sat beside him, her hand on his arm. "Noelle, we wanted to talk to you about the future," Dad started, not looking at me. "You're turning 18 soon and you'll be off to college. We have updated my will." My blood went cold. "I just want to make sure everyone is taken care of," he continued, his voice monotone as if he were reading a script. "The house and the company, they'll go to Miranda. She'll run things if anything happens to me." "What?" I whispered. "But Heartline, that's your company. That's Grandpa's company. And Miranda is my wife," he said, his voice hardening, a flicker of Miranda's own steel in his tone. "She's Cade and Bry's mother. She needs to be able to provide for them, for the family." "But what about me?" "We've set up an educational trust for you," Miranda cut in, her voice bright and helpful. "Your father was very generous. It's more than enough to cover your tuition, books, and living expenses all the way through a master's degree if you want." I looked at Dad. He was finally looking at me, his eyes pleading. "It's all taken care of, Noelle. You won't have to worry about a thing." "There's just one little formality," Miranda added, tapping a pen on the table, "to make sure the money is managed properly and lasts as long as you need it. I'll be the trustee until you're 25. I didn't understand what that meant. Not really. Not until I tried to use it. I got my acceptance letter to the State University of Mountain Ridge, landscape architecture, a piece of my mother. I'd held on to her old design books I'd hidden in the bathroom. It was my escape pod. "I need to pay the housing deposit," I told Miranda, holding out the acceptance form. It's $500. She took the paper from me and squinted at it. $500? Just to hold a room? That seems like a scam. It's not a scam. It's the deposit. It goes toward the first semester's payment. It's due by the 1st. Well, I'm not just going to give you $500, she scoffed. I need an itemized invoice. I need a link to the payment portal. I need the university's tax ID number. I'm the trustee, Noel. That means I am legally responsible for making sure this educational fund isn't wasted on parties or whatever. This was the new game. It wasn't about money. It was about humiliation. It was about power. Every expense became an interrogation. Every textbook a battle. Why can't you buy it used? Why does this art class require a $200 materials fee? Are the pencils made of gold? This meal plan, it's the most expensive one. Why do you need the unlimited option? Are you planning on eating 24 hours a day? Each request was a daunting ordeal. I had to present receipts, statements, and justifications, laying them out on the kitchen table for her to scrutinize, her pen tapping, her expression one of deep suspicion. It was her favorite form of theater. The fight for the dorm deposit took a week. It ended with me screaming and Dad finally wearily telling her to just sign the damn check, Miranda. She signed it, her lips a thin white line, but as she handed it to me, she smiled. Have fun at college, honey. Don't forget to send me the receipts for your books. All of them. I packed my bags that August. I took my hidden box of Mom's things, my clothes, and the few photos I'd managed to salvage. I packed them into my 10-year-old Ford Focus. As I was leaving, Dad hugged me, his hug hesitant, his eyes already drifting back to the house, to the noise inside. Be good, Noel. Call us. I nodded, but I knew I wouldn't. I drove away from the beige house with the ugly gold walls and the constant throbbing bass line. I didn't look back. I lived in the dorms. I relished the small concrete block room I shared with a stranger. It was quiet. It was safe. It was mine. I went home only when I had to. Thanksgiving was a tense 4-hour ordeal of eating food I didn't recognize and listening to Miranda talk about her new energies. Christmas, I claimed I had to work. That house wasn't my home anymore. It was enemy territory, and Miranda was its queen. The call came in the middle of my junior year, right before midterms. I was in the library, drowning in blueprints for a public park design. When Miranda's name flashed on my screen, I always flinched when I saw it. It never meant good news. Noelle, she said, her voice dripping with a false syrupy concern. I'm so glad I caught you. I have some, well, it's just terrible news. I waited, my pencil freezing over the blueprint. I just got off the phone with the financial advisor. The market has been, well, it's just in a tailspin, a complete disaster. It seems the portfolio your father set up, it's taken a massive hit. Just massive. My stomach tightened. What does that mean, Miranda? It means, she sighed, a perfect performance of reluctant duty, that the trust is, well, it's mostly gone. I've managed to salvage just enough to cover your base tuition for the rest of your time, but that's it. I'm so sorry, honey. There's just no more money for housing or books or, food. I looked around the library. The quiet hum of students studying suddenly felt like a roar. No, that can't be right. Dad said it was more than enough. He said it was locked in. Well, your father isn't an investor, is he? She said, her voice turning sharp for a second before catching itself. Look, I feel terrible, but my hands are tied. The market is the market. You'll just have to, figure it out like Cade and Bree do. It's good for you. Builds character. The line clicked. Figure it out. I had 3 weeks until my dorm payment was due for the next month. I had $112 in my checking account. The next 48 hours were a blur of panic and online applications. I was no longer just a student. I was a machine that needed to produce rent. I got 2 jobs. The first was Canyon Brew, the 5 a.m. shift. My alarm would go off at 4:15, a violent shriek in the dark. I'd pull on my black uniform, the polo shirt already smelling faintly of stale coffee and burnt milk, and walk the mile to the cafe in the pre-dawn chill. For 5 hours, I was a robot. Hi, what can I get started for you? Large latte, oat milk, extra shot, room for cream. The hiss of the steam wand became the soundtrack to my life. The smell of roasted beans was so thick in the air it clung to my hair, my skin, my clothes. I'd be sticky with spilled syrup by 7 a.m. My hands were raw from the sanitizing solution, my feet throbbing on the hard tile floor. I'd chug burnt espresso just to stay upright. At 10 a.m., my shift would end, and I'd run to my 10:30 landscape and ecology class, the smell of coffee rolling off me in waves, my brain buzzing and foggy. I'd sit in the back row, my notebook open, but my eyes would sting. The professor's voice would become a low, meaningless drone. I'd wake up with a jolt, a line of drool on my page, having lost 20 minutes of the lecture. After my classes, I had a 2-hour break. I didn't go back to my dorm. I went to the library, not to study, but to sleep, my head pillowed on my backpack in a carrel on the 3rd floor. At 4:45 p.m., I'd clock in for my second job, M-Way Books. If Canyon Brew was a sensory assault, M-Way was a sensory deprivation chamber. It was silent, carpeted, and smelled of paper dust and the faint sweet scent of the adjoining Cinnabon. My job was simple: reshelf books and man the cash register. It was mind-numbing, endless work. I'd push a cart of books, my steps muffled, my body on autopilot. Fiction, MN, history, world, self-help. The hours crawled, the fluorescent lights gave me a permanent dull headache. I'd clock out at 10 p.m., eat a protein bar as I walked back to my dorm, and then start my 18 credits of homework. I'd draft blueprints until 2 a.m., my vision blurring, my hands shaking from caffeine and exhaustion. I was running a 70-hour workweek on top of a full, demanding course load. I was living on stolen sleep, caffeine, and the stale pastries they let me take home from Canyon Brew. I was a ghost haunting my own life. I lost weight. I stopped talking to the few friends I had. I was just surviving. When the spring semester finally ended, I was a husk. I'd managed to pay my rent, but I had nothing saved. I couldn't afford summer housing. I had no choice. I had to go back to the house in Aurora. I pulled up to the curb, my old Ford Focus coughing. The house looked the same. The Tuscan gold paint was peeling. Cade's car, a new black muscle car I didn't recognize, was parked in the driveway. I let myself in with my old key. The house vibrated with the familiar thump-thump-thump of Cade's bass. "Oh, you're here," Miranda said, not looking up from her phone. She was at the kitchen table, which was now her permanent command center. "Dad's on a long haul to Phoenix." "Where should I put my stuff?" I asked, my duffel bag heavy in my hand. "Oh, right. Your old attic room is... well, it's just full of our winter storage. We had to make space." "The attic room? The one I slept in before?" "Yeah, but don't worry," she said, finally looking up with a bright, false smile. "We cleared out your original room for you." I froze. My old room, the one Bree had taken. "You did?" A tiny, stupid spark of hope lit in my chest. Maybe something had changed. I walked down the hall. I pushed open the door. It wasn't my room. It was Cade's kingdom. The walls were covered in thick, black acoustic foam, the kind I'd seen in the photos of his studio. The bed was gone. In its place was a massive, sprawling console, a professional-grade mixing board blinking with dozens of tiny lights. Microphones stood on booms. A sleek new iMac glowed on a desk. Synthesizers and guitars lined the walls. It smelled like dust, electronics, and stale weed. This wasn't a hobby. This was a professional setup. This cost thousands, tens of thousands. "Where's Bri?" I murmured, backing out. "Oh, she's sharing my room now." "It's cozier," Miranda called from the kitchen. "You can just, I don't know, find a spot on the new sectional. It's super comfy. Cade says it's fine as long as you're quiet when he's recording." For 2 weeks, I lived on the black microfiber couch that smelled like spilled beer and old fast food. I was invisible. I'd wake up at 6 a.m., before anyone else, fold my blanket and leave the house. I'd spend my days at the public library pretending to look for a summer job I didn't want, just to be out of that house. I was living like a refugee, camping in the living room of a house that was legally half mine. The breaking point came late one night. It was after 2 a.m. I was pretending to be asleep on the couch, my back aching. Cade was in his studio. The thump-thump-thump, a relentless migraine. I heard Miranda's door open. She didn't go to the kitchen. She went to the studio. She knocked softly. "Cade, honey, turn that down." The music cut off. I could hear their voices, low and clear in the silence of the house. "Did you get the transfer?" Cade asked. His voice was muffled but audible. "Yes," Miranda whispered back, sharp and annoyed. "The full 3,000. It'll show up in your Blue Mesa media account by morning, but you have to be more careful. This new equipment, you're spending it as fast as I can move it." Mom, chill. This is my career. That interface was essential. It's not that easy, Cade. Simulating investment losses to hide the withdrawals is getting harder. The advisor is starting to ask questions about the market volatility. My blood turned to ice. Simulating investment losses. So what? Cade scoffed. It's her money. Who cares? That old freak left her way too much anyway. She's not even using it right. I'm building an empire. It's not just her money, you idiot, Miranda hissed. It's ours. It's your car. It's this house. I've been moving almost $100,000 out of that trust over the last 3 years. This isn't just pocket money. This is our life. If she ever finds out, if her father ever looks— He won't look, Cade said. He's too whipped and she's too stupid. She thinks she's broke. It's perfect. I couldn't breathe. My heart was a hammer against my ribs. $100,000. My housing, my books, my food, my 70-hour work weeks, my raw hands, the exhaustion that had hollowed me out. It was all a lie, a game. They had stolen it, they had bled my trust dry to build a monument to Cade's ego, and they made me believe I was a failure for not being able to afford rent. I lay there, rigid, until the sun came up. I didn't sleep, I just planned. The next morning, I waited. Miranda came out, yawning in her silk robe. Cade was still asleep. "Miranda," I said. My voice was calm. It was so calm it scared me. She looked up, startled. "What? You're up early? I heard you last night, you and Cade." The color drained from her face. The fake smile, the concern, the annoyance. It all vanished, leaving something cold and hard. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Simulating investment losses," I said. "Blue Mesa Media, $3,000 a month, $100,000. She stood up. For a second, I thought she was going to hit me. Instead, she walked to the hall closet and pulled out my duffel bag and the single box of my mother's things I'd stored there. She walked to the front door, opened it, and threw them onto the lawn. "Get out," she said. Her voice was a flat, dead whisper. "This is my father's house," I said, my voice shaking, the calm finally breaking. "You can't. It is my house," she spat, her face transforming into a mask of pure venom. "Your father signed it over, and you are a guest, and you are no longer welcome. I'm going to tell him," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I'm going to tell him everything. Tell him." She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Go ahead. Who do you think he'll believe? His loving wife who takes care of him, or the ungrateful, lazy daughter who's been failing her classes and can't hold down a job?" She had been building this narrative. I saw it now. The bad market, my struggles. It was all a setup. "Get off my property," she said, pulling her phone from her robe, "or I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." "Try me." I looked at her. I looked at the box of my mother's things lying on the damp grass. I looked at the house my mother had loved, now a fortress for her enemies. I walked out. I didn't say another word. I picked up my bag and my box, put them in the trunk of my Ford Focus, and got in the car. I started the engine. I had $42 in my account. I had a full tank of gas. I had nowhere to go. That night, I parked in the 24-hour Walmart lot, hidden between a construction van and a massive RV. I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go. I locked the doors, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would break my ribs. My car was no longer a car. It was my house. The next day, I reactivated my old 24/7 gym membership, not to work out. It was $19.99 a month for a hot shower and a clean bathroom. I learned to park in quiet residential neighborhoods, moving every few hours so no one would get suspicious. I learned to live on one meal a day, the day-old pastries from the Canyon Brew I'd transferred to near Aurora, which I ate in my car, crying as I watched people walk into their warm, safe homes. My world shrank to the dimensions of a 2012 Ford Focus. It was a space defined by the smell of old upholstery, stale coffee, and a constant, low-grade fear. I learned a new kind of physics, a new kind of architecture, the architecture of survival. I developed a nightly ritual. Park, always under a light but not directly, in a spot with a clear exit. Recline the driver's seat until it groaned in protest. Wedge my duffel bag between the passenger seat and the door to create a barrier. Check the locks 3 times, then I'd take the old aluminum baseball bat Dad had bought me for a long-abandoned softball career and lay it on the passenger seat. Its cool metal, a pathetic but necessary comfort. The final step was the windows. I learned to crack them just enough. a half-inch gap, to let in air but not a hand. It was a precise science, the balance between suffocation and vulnerability. Summer was a relentless torment. The Colorado sun, so beautiful from a distance, was a predator. By noon, the 95-degree heat turned my car into a convection oven. The air was thick, heavy, and tasted of hot plastic. The vinyl of the steering wheel was sticky, almost molten. The seatbelt buckle was a brand. I'd wake from a fitful nap, drenched in sweat, my clothes clinging to me, my hair plastered to my forehead, gasping for air that offered no relief. My only refuge was M-Way books. I'd go in hours before my shift, pretending to browse. I'd find a quiet corner in the biography section and just stand there, letting the blessed refrigerated air wash over me. The employee break room was my sanctuary. It was a tiny, windowless room with a flickering fluorescent light, but it had a vent that pumped out glorious 68-degree air. I'd sit on a plastic chair, close my eyes, and just breathe in, out, feeling the coolness seep into my skin, chasing away the oppressive heat of the car. It was the most luxurious feeling in the world. My grades, once my pride, were in free fall. I was too tired to read, too distracted to draft. My hands, once steady enough to draw precise architectural lines, now had a permanent tremor from the caffeine and lack of sleep. My landscape history professor, a kind, eagle-eyed man named Martinez, noticed. He asked me to stay after class one day. "Hart," he said, his brow furrowed as he looked at my latest submission, a blurry, half-finished site analysis. "This isn't your work. Is everything all right?" I stared at the floor, shame hot in my cheeks. "I'm fine," I mumbled. "Just busy with work." "2 jobs, right?" he asked gently. "That's a heavy load. With 18 credits, the university has resources: NOEL, financial aid, counseling, emergency grants." I flinched. The thought of filling out more forms, of explaining my situation to a stranger in a sterile office, of being judged and pitied, it was unbearable. "I'm fine," I repeated, my voice firmer. "I've got it under control. I just need to manage my time better." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes full of a sympathy I couldn't accept. "My door is always open," he said. Finally, I fled his office. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat. It felt like proving Miranda right, that I was a failure who couldn't handle it. My pride, the last thing I owned, was a stubborn, stupid shield. As summer bled into autumn, the heat was replaced by a new enemy, the cold. The nights grew longer, and the temperature dropped. The thin metal shell of the car offered no insulation. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., my teeth chattering, a deep gnawing cold settled in my bones. The windows would be opaque with frost on the inside. I could see my breath, a pale ghost in the moonlight. I took $20 I'd been saving for a new textbook and went to a thrift store. I bought an old, musty sleeping bag. It was thin, and it smelled like someone else's attic, but it was a layer. It was something between me and the cold that was trying to seep into my marrow. Some nights were unbearable, the nights when rain turned to ice, encasing my car in a frozen shell. On those nights, if I had the money from an extra shift, I would break. I'd drive to a motel on the edge of town, the kind with a flickering neon sign and rooms that smelled of pine cleaner in desperation. I'd hand over $60 in cash, a week's worth of food, for 6 hours of warmth. I'd stand in the shower until the hot water ran out, the steam fogging the mirror, just feeling the glorious, painful heat on my frozen skin. I'd lie on the lumpy, scratchy bed and fall into a dead, dreamless sleep, knowing it was a temporary reprieve, a $60 paradise. It was the first week of November. The morning rush at Canyon Brew was a frantic ballet of steam wands and shouted orders. I was on autopilot, my body moving through the motions, my mind a million miles away, calculating if I had enough gas to make it to campus and back. "Can I get a large black, no sugar?" The voice cut through the noise. It wasn't the content, it was the timbre, a low, familiar rumble. A voice from a different lifetime. A voice I hadn't heard in nearly a decade. I looked up from the register. My hands froze on the touchscreen. It was him, Silas Whitmore, my grandfather. He looked older. His dark hair was now almost entirely silver, brushed back from his forehead. There were deeper lines around his eyes, but he was the same man, solid and immense in a dark wool coat that probably cost more than my car. He was staring at me. Not at the name tag that said Noel, but at my face. His expression was one of polite ordering, but as he looked, it shifted. It slid from casual to confused, then to a dawning, horrified recognition. He saw me, not the barista, me. He saw the dark circles under my eyes. He saw the cheap, frayed uniform. He saw how thin my face had become. He saw the exhaustion that had become a permanent part of my features. "Noel," he whispered, his voice cracking on my name. The person behind him in line coughed impatiently. My manager shot me a look. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. "One large black coffee," I managed to say, my own voice a stranger's. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely punch in the order. $3.50. He handed me a $50 bill, his eyes never leaving my face. "Keep it," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I have a meeting. I'll be back at noon. Don't go anywhere, please." He took the coffee and left, leaving me standing there, trembling, the $50 bill clutched in my hand. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. At exactly 12:05 p.m., he walked back in. He was holding a large paper bag. "My lunch break," I said mechanically to my manager. I took off my apron and walked out, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. He was waiting by a sleek black sedan that was so clean it seemed to repel the city's grime. He opened the passenger door. "Get in," he said. It wasn't a question. I slid into the seat. It smelled of rich, clean leather. The silence inside the car was absolute, a stark contrast to the rattling symphony of my Ford Focus. He handed me the bag. Inside was a thick turkey and avocado sandwich on fresh bread and a bottle of water. I hadn't eaten a real meal in days. I unwrapped it and took a bite. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. I ate half of it in 3 bites before I realized I was crying. Silent, hot tears running down my face and dripping onto the sandwich paper. He just sat there watching me, his own face a mask of grief and fury. "Start at the beginning," he said, his voice a low growl. "And don't you dare leave anything out." And so I told him. The words came out in a torrent, a jumbled, desperate confession. The story I'd never told anyone because I was too ashamed, too proud. "Dad remarried," I started, "a woman named Miranda. She moved in with her kids. She took over the house, Dad's company, everything. I told him about the will, about the educational trust. And then this year my voice broke. She called me. She said the market crashed. She said the trust was gone, just enough for tuition, nothing else. She said I had to figure it out." I took a deep breath. "She kicked me out, Grandpa. She threw my things on the lawn and threatened to call the police if I didn't leave." "And your father?" he asked, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Where was Graham in all this? "He let her," I whispered. "He just lets her do whatever she wants." I finally looked at him, ready for the lecture, for the disappointment. Instead, his face was flushed with a deep, furious red. His eyes were blazing. "That stupid, prideful fool," he bit out, hitting the steering wheel with the heel of his hand. The sound made me jump. "And me? Damn me for letting him push me away! Damn me for losing you!" He turned to me, his eyes softening, but the anger still burned there. "How long, Noel? How long have you been living like this?" "Since June," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "In my car." He closed his eyes. A muscle jumped in his jaw. When he opened them, they were clear and full of a terrifying resolve. "All right," he said, his voice flat and hard as steel. "Here's what's going to happen. You are going to take me to your car. You are going to get your school books and any personal items you need. The rest of it, we'll deal with that junk later. Then you're going to get in this car, and you're coming home with me to Santa Fe Hills. End of discussion." An hour later, I was standing in a guest room in his sprawling, beautiful home. It was 3 times the size of my dorm room. It had a real bed with a thick duvet and a mountain of pillows. It had a private bathroom with a walk-in shower and fluffy white towels. I stood under the hot water for 20 minutes, the steam so thick I couldn't see, and just sobbed. I washed away the smell of stale coffee, of my car, of the last 6 months of my life. He'd left a tray on the bed for me, the other half of my sandwich and a tall glass of milk. I ate it, crawled under the covers, and fell asleep instantly. I only slept for 2 hours, but when I woke up, the late afternoon sun was streaming through the window. It was the first true, deep, safe sleep I'd had in years. It felt like I'd been asleep for a lifetime. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the unfamiliar sensation of being completely, utterly safe. The sunlight filtering through the large window didn't feel like a threat, but an invitation. For the first time in months, I hadn't slept with one ear open for the sound of a police officer's tap on the glass or a stranger's footsteps. Silas was in the kitchen reading the Wall Street Journal, a formidable figure even in a simple polo shirt. He looked up as I entered, and a flicker of the previous day's fury crossed his face before softening. "Sleep well?" he asked. I didn't have the words. "Yes, thank you." "Good," he said, folding the paper with a crisp snap. "Because today we go to war. Finish your breakfast. We have a meeting at 10. The law offices of Shaw Associates were on the top floor of a glass skyscraper in downtown Denver. It was a world of hushed carpets, polished wood, and panoramic views of the mountains. It was a place built on power. Porter Shaw was the embodiment of that power. He was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He didn't look like a bulldog. He looked like a surgeon, someone who could dissect a problem with terrifying precision. We sat in leather chairs facing his massive desk. Silas laid out the story, his voice a low, controlled rumble of facts. He spoke of my mother's death, my father's grief, Miranda's arrival, the will, the trust. Then he gestured to me. "Noel will tell you the rest." My voice was shaky at first, but Porter's focused, non-judgmental gaze was calming. I told him everything, the phone call about the bad market, the 2 jobs, the exhaustion, the overheard conversation, the studio full of equipment, being thrown out, living in my car. I told the story without tears, my voice gaining strength as the litany of injustices piled up. When I finished, Porter was silent for a long moment, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Breach of fiduciary duty," he said, his voice calm and sharp. "Fraudulent misrepresentation, conversion of trust assets, possibly undue influence regarding the will. Though that's a harder fight. But the trust is a fortress, Noel, and she has raided it." He looked at Silas. "The plan is simple. First, we file an ex parte motion for a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction. We ask the court to freeze the trust's assets and compel the trustee, Miranda, to provide a full accounting, including every bank and credit card statement from the day she took control." "She'll fight it," Silas said. "Let her," Porter replied with a thin smile. "Every dollar she spends on a lawyer to fight this will be another piece of evidence. Second, we hire a forensic accountant. I use the best, a woman named Alvarez. She can find a decimal point in a hurricane. She will trace every single penny." The legal machinery moved with a speed that was both thrilling and terrifying. Within a week, a judge had granted the order. Miranda was legally required to turn over the records. The first box of documents arrived at Porter's office a month later. I sat with him and the accountant, Alvarez, a woman with a no-nonsense haircut and eyes that lit up at the sight of spreadsheets. The bank statements for the trust were laid out across a conference table. It didn't take Alvarez long. "Here," she said, her finger tracing a line of withdrawals. "It's a classic pattern. Smurfing, small, repeated withdrawals, not big enough to trigger automatic bank alerts, but regular as clockwork." She was right. Every month for 3 years, a transfer, sometimes $2,500, sometimes $3,200. Always to the same account, Blue Mesa Media. "And look at the memo line," Porter pointed out, his voice grim. Every single one had a note: portfolio hedge, risk mitigation, hedging market exposure. "She was creating a paper trail," I whispered, the cold reality of the premeditation washing over me. She was faking it. She was building the lie from the very beginning. "Oh, it gets better," Alvarez said, pulling out a second set of statements. "The trustee is allowed to pay herself a reasonable fee for her services. She paid herself a lump sum of $30,000 6 months ago. The memo, trustee management fees, 3 years. $30,000? I choked out. For what? For telling me the money was gone? For her new handbag collection? Apparently, Porter said, sliding a folder of credit card statements across the table. The trust had a credit card linked to it for educational expenses. I read the list of charges: Saks Fifth Avenue, Neiman Marcus, a spa in Scottsdale, and then a series of charges from a high-end audio equipment supplier, thousands of dollars, a professional-grade microphone, a digital audio interface, a top-of-the-line iMac. Cade's entire studio, bought and paid for with my tuition money, with the money that was supposed to keep a roof over my head. The anger I felt was so pure, so hot. It almost made me dizzy. The second major discovery came a week later. Alvarez was cross-referencing the trust's outflows with Heartline Freight's financials, which Silas had managed to acquire through his own channels. "Here's something interesting," she said, pointing to a single large transfer of $50,000 from my trust to Heartline Freight's operating account. The memo simply read, "Bridge loan." Porter leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Self-dealing. A trustee cannot loan money from the trust to a business she controls. There's no loan agreement, no interest rate, no repayment schedule. She took your money, Noel, and injected it into your father's company, the company she now owns, as a personal interest-free loan. It's textbook embezzlement." But the real bombshell, the piece of evidence that broke the case wide open, came from a ghost. Porter's team was doing a deep dive into the digital assets of Heartline Freight. They discovered that years ago, before Dad had upgraded to a newer cloud-based system, he had used a desktop accounting software called Ghost Ledger. When he switched systems, the new company had migrated most of the data. But the old software was never properly decommissioned. It was still sitting on an old server in the office. And for the last 5 years, it had been programmed to do one thing: send a condensed, automated quarterly report to a list of recipients. The list included my father, the company's old accountant, and a forgotten technical support email address, techsupport@heartlinefreight.com. An email address no one had checked in years. Porter's investigator got a warrant for the server and access to the email account. In it, they found a digital time capsule, 20 quarterly reports sent like clockwork, completely ignored. These reports, generated by the old incorruptible system, showed the company's cash flow, its debt-to-asset ratio, its profit margins. They showed a healthy, stable company under my father's management, and they showed a slow, steady decline after Miranda took an active role, culminating in the sudden, miraculous $50,000 cash injection from my trust. The ghost ledger had been silently recording the truth all along. The final piece of the puzzle was not digital. It was painfully, horribly real. Silas had hired a private investigator, a former cop, to canvass the neighborhood around my old house. He spoke to the woman who lived across the street. She remembered Miranda having a large garage sale the summer I'd left for college. "Did you happen to notice what she was selling?" the investigator asked. "Oh, all sorts of things," the neighbor said, "but I remember thinking it was strange. She was selling all of Lydia's, the first wife's, gardening awards and her beautiful books. Lydia loved those books." The investigator asked the question Porter had told him to. "By any chance, do you have a doorbell camera?" She did, and she had saved the footage. Porter played it for me in his office. I watched on a large screen as Miranda, smiling, haggled with a stranger over a box. My mother's box, the one with her trophies and her landscape design books, the box I had fought for, the box I had hidden under the bathroom sink. I watched her take $40 in cash and hand over the last tangible pieces of my mother's passion. The evidence was now a mountain, a digital mountain of bank statements and ghost reports, and a real-world mountain of video evidence. Porter laid it all out. "We have 2 paths," he said, his voice level. "Plan A, we schedule a settlement meeting. You, me, Silas, Miranda, and her lawyer. We present this evidence, all of it. We offer her a deal. She repays every cent she stole, plus interest. She resigns as trustee immediately. She signs over her shares in Heartline Freight. In return, we sign a non-disclosure agreement, and this all stays a civil matter." "And Plan B?" Silas asked. "Plan B," Porter said, his eyes hard as flint, "is we walk out of that meeting and I file this entire package with the district attorney's office. We pursue criminal charges for felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and perjury. She will likely go to prison." The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I sat in Silas's study, a legal pad in front of me, rehearsing what I would say. I wrote down the facts, the dates, the amounts. I practiced saying the words, "You stole from me," without letting my voice crack. I decided I would not cry. Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford. Tears were for victims. I was no longer a victim. I was the person holding the evidence. Silas came in and sat in the armchair across from me. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, a silent, unshakable presence, a wall. He was the grandfather who had bought me priceless books, who had tried to buy my mother's life. Now he was backing me as I prepared to take back my own. The conference room at Shaw Associates was on the 40th floor. It was a space designed to intimidate, a long, sterile room with a single, massive slab of polished granite for a table. The air was cold, recycled, and silent. I sat to the right of Porter Shaw. Silas sat to my right, a silent, immovable mountain in a dark gray suit. We were a united front. We had been waiting for 3 minutes. The clock on the wall was digital, its numbers flipping with a faint, imperceptible click. I watched it, focusing on the movement, trying to control the adrenaline that was making my hands tremble under the table. At 10:03 a.m., the door opened. A young, nervous-looking lawyer I didn't recognize walked in, his briefcase clutched in his hand. He looked like he was expecting a simple deposition. And then Miranda swept in behind him. She was dressed for an audience, wearing a sharp, cream-colored pantsuit that looked expensive. In the crook of her arm, she carried a large black leather designer handbag. The gold logo glittered under the recessed lighting. I felt a hot flash of rage. I recognized the bag. I had seen it on the credit card statement from Saks, charged to my educational trust. She was smiling, a bright, confident smile meant to disarm. "Mr. Shaw," she began, extending a hand to her lawyer. Then her eyes adjusted to the room. She saw Porter. She saw the man next to him. Her gaze locked onto Silas. Her smile didn't just fade, it shattered. The blood drained from her face, leaving her makeup sitting like a mask on pale, waxy skin. Her hand, the one not holding my tuition money, clenched at her side. She had expected to bully Porter, to face me. Maybe she had not, in her wildest calculations, expected to see Silas Whitmore, a man whose net worth eclipsed her entire world. Her eyes darted from Silas to me, sitting beside him. Her expression shifted from shock to a deep, venomous resentment. I wasn't the girl in the car anymore. I was the one who had brought the tank. "Mrs. Hart," Porter said, his voice as cool and smooth as the granite table. He did not stand. He gestured to the chairs opposite us. "Please sit. This is my associate, and this is Mr. Silas Whitmore, who is here on behalf of his granddaughter, Ms. Noel Hart." Miranda and her lawyer sat. The young lawyer fumbled with the clasp on his briefcase. Miranda just stared, her hands clasped tightly on top of the handbag in her lap, her knuckles white. "We are here," Porter continued, "to discuss several significant irregularities in your management of the Lydia Hart Educational Trust." He picked up a small remote. The large screen on the wall, which had been black, flickered to life. "I find it's best to proceed chronologically." The screen was filled with a PDF, a bank statement. "On March 12, 2022, Porter said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room, "You assumed trusteeship of the trust, valued at $412,000. On March 14th, 2 days later, you opened this credit card linked directly to the trust's assets." He clicked. The next slide was a credit card statement. "We'll start with the most obvious breach. The trust document is explicit. It is for the educational and living expenses of the beneficiary, Ms. Hart." He clicked again. A single charge was highlighted. "Saks, Fifth Avenue, $2,800 for this handbag, I presume," he said, gesturing with his pen toward the item in her lap. Miranda's lawyer cleared his throat. "My client is entitled to reasonable trustee fees, and as the head of the household, we'll get to your client's fees in a moment," Porter said, not looking at him. He clicked again. "Audio Generation, Inc., $4,200. Sweetwater Sound, $350. Apple, $2,500. A total of $9,850 in professional-grade music equipment." "Ms. Hart?" Porter turned to me, his voice formal. "Are you pursuing a degree in music production?" "No," I said, my voice clear and loud. "I'm in landscape architecture." "I see." Porter turned back to Miranda, whose face was now flushed with a blotchy red anger. "Then perhaps you can explain these charges." "It's an investment," Miranda stammered, finding her voice, "for the family. For my son, Cade. He has a career. A career you are funding with stolen money," Porter said, his voice flat. He clicked again. The screen now showed a spreadsheet, a long, neat column of withdrawals every month. $2,500, $3,000, $3,200. "Which brings us to these," Porter said. "Monthly transfers to a shell corporation, Blue Mesa Media, which we have confirmed is registered to Cade Vale. The memo line on every single transfer, hedge exposure. A paper trail, a very clumsy one." And then he clicked again. There is the $50,000 bridge loan you transferred from the trust directly to Heartline Freight, a company you control, a loan with no contract, no interest, and no repayment terms. I was protecting the family business, Miranda snapped, her voice rising. It was a difficult market. I was acting in the best interests of the whole family. An investment? Porter asked, his voice soft. He leaned forward. A trustee investing trust funds into her own failing business. An interesting strategy, Mrs. Hart. Where is the contract? Where is the promissory note? Miranda's lawyer was frantically shuffling papers, his face pale. My client was exercising her discretion. Her discretion, Porter cut him off, his voice turning to ice, resulted in her telling the beneficiary, Ms. Hart, that the trust was mostly gone. It resulted in Ms. Hart having to work 2 jobs, 70 hours a week, to pay for her own food and housing. It resulted in Ms. Hart being forced to live in her car while you were investing in handbags and your son's hobby. The lawyer stopped shuffling. Miranda stared at Porter, her mouth opening and closing, and finally Porter said, "There is the matter of the trust's non-monetary assets, the personal effects of Lydia Hart, which were to be held in trust for Noel." He clicked the remote. The screen changed from spreadsheets to a video. It was grainy, time-stamped, and shot from a doorbell camera. I saw the lawn of my old house. I saw Miranda smiling, wearing a pink tracksuit, talking to a stranger. And I saw the box, the cardboard box I had hidden under the bathroom sink, the box with my mother's landscape design books and her gardening trophies. We watched in absolute silence as Miranda accepted a small fold of cash, $40, and handed the box to the man who loaded it into his truck. Miranda was frozen. She stared at the screen, her face a mask of disbelief. She had been caught, visibly, irrefutably caught, selling my mother's memory on a sunny afternoon. My hands were fists in my lap, my nails digging into my palms. I had promised myself I would not cry. I would not show weakness. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on her. I spoke for the first time. My voice was low, but it cut through the cold air like glass. "Those things you sold," I said. "They were mine. They were my mother's." Miranda flinched, as if I had slapped her. Porter Shaw let the silence hang for a beat. Then he reached down and pulled 2 thick spiral-bound files from his briefcase. He slid them across the polished granite. They stopped directly in front of Miranda. "You have 2 options, Mrs. Hart," he said. He tapped the file on the left. "File A. This is a civil settlement agreement. You will immediately and irrevocably resign as trustee. You will repay every single dollar you misappropriated plus 9% compounded interest, totaling $199,250. You will also pay all legal fees and the cost of the forensic investigation, which comes to $48,000. Finally, you will sign over your entire controlling interest in Heartline Freight to its rightful heir, Ms. Hart." "That's blackmail," Miranda's lawyer sputtered. "That's everything. You're leaving her with nothing. She is being left with her own assets," Silas spoke for the first time. His voice was a low growl that shook the room. "Which is more than she deserves." And then Porter said, tapping the thick file on the right, "There is File B. This is a complete criminal complaint. It contains every document you've seen today, every statement, the video, and the sworn affidavit from the forensic accountant. If you do not sign File A, I will personally walk File B to the district attorney's office this afternoon. We will sue you in civil court, and I will see to it that you are criminally prosecuted for felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and perjury." He looked at his watch. "You have 5 minutes." Miranda looked at the 2 files as if they were bombs. Her hands were shaking so hard she hid them in her lap. She looked at her lawyer, who was pale and sweating. He was a minnow in a shark tank, and he knew it. He gave a tiny, defeated shake of his head. She looked at me. Her eyes were not apologetic. They were not sad. They were bottomless pits of pure, concentrated hatred. I could see the gears turning in her head. I could see her thinking she could sign, then declare bankruptcy, hide the assets in Cade's name, fight this. She thought she could still find a way out. "I'll sign," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "A wise choice," Porter said. He separated the last 2 pages from File A and slid them toward her along with a pen. "One more thing," he said, sliding over a final single sheet. "This is an addendum. You have 30 days to liquidate the necessary assets and make the full payment to an escrow account. Not 31, 30. If the funds are not transferred in full by that deadline, the settlement is void and Plan B is filed automatically. There are no extensions. There are no appeals. With a shaking, spidery hand, Miranda scrawled her name. It was an angry, jagged line. She shoved the papers back across the table. "We're done," she spat. She grabbed her handbag, my handbag, and stood up. She didn't look at her lawyer. She didn't look at Silas. She looked at me. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "I don't think I will," I said. She turned and stormed out of the room, her lawyer scrambling to gather his papers and follow her. The door clicked shut. I let out a breath I had been holding for 6 months. My entire body felt like it was vibrating. Silas put his enormous warm hand on my shoulder. "It's done, Noel," he said. "The first step." Porter was already on his phone. "Yes, I need to file the emergency change of trustee. Silas Whitmore." "Correct." He hung up and looked at me. "Silas is the new trustee, effective immediately. Your first checks for tuition, a new apartment near campus, and a stipend will be cut this afternoon." He glanced at a note. "He has also prepaid for an introductory set of sessions with a Dr. Naomi Cole for the stress." I nodded, numb. "Thank you." "Now," Porter said, a rare thin smile touching his lips, "you can go and quit those jobs. Your only job now is to graduate." As I stood up, my phone, which I'd left on the table, buzzed. It was a text from Cade. It included an audio file. I recorded everything. "You can't threaten my mom. That's illegal blackmail. I'm sending this to the cops. You're the ones going to jail." My blood ran cold. I showed the phone to Porter. He read the text. He looked at the audio file, and then Porter Shaw, a man I thought was made of ice and granite, laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "Oh, this is marvelous," he said, rubbing his hands together. "This isn't blackmail, Mr. Vale. This is a privileged settlement negotiation, and your son, in his infinite wisdom, has just created an independent, authenticated recording of his mother hearing every single allegation of her fraud and embezzlement and admitting to it by signing the settlement. He thinks he's exposing us." He grinned at me. "He just handed us the single best piece of evidence we have if she defaults on that 30-day payment. He just personally gift-wrapped her prison sentence." The first check from the newly managed trust wasn't for tuition. It was for a security deposit. I found a small studio apartment on the 3rd floor of a brick building 6 blocks from campus. It was nothing special. It had a galley kitchen, a bathroom with questionable tile, and a main room that was just big enough for a bed, a desk, and a small sofa. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. The first morning, I woke up just before dawn, my heart pounding, my muscles tensing for the inevitable tap, tap, tap of a police officer's flashlight on the window. My eyes snapped open. I wasn't in my car. I was in a bed. The only sound was the hum of the small refrigerator. I got up, walked to the window, and did something I hadn't been able to do in 6 months. I pulled the cord and opened the blinds. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun come up, letting the morning light hit my face, and I didn't feel a single trace of fear. I wasn't exposed. I was home. That weekend, Silas sat me down in his study. "You're safe now, Noel," he said, his voice gentle. "The legal fight is underway, but that's only one part of this." He slid a business card across his desk. "Dr. Naomi Cole. She's a therapist. She specializes in trauma and complicated grief." I bristled. "I'm not crazy, Grandpa." "I know," he said, his eyes holding mine. "You're wounded. There's a difference. What Miranda did, that was a betrayal deeper than money. And what your father, what he allowed to happen, that's a wound of its own. You're grieving your mother, but you're also grieving the family you thought you had. You don't have to carry that alone." Dr. Cole's office was not what I expected. It was a comfortable room filled with books and plants. She was a calm, practical woman who didn't ask me how I felt. She asked me what happened. I told her all of it, the car, the cold, the constant gnawing humiliation. "What you're experiencing isn't just sadness, Noel," she explained, her voice steady. "It's a form of hypervigilance. You've been in survival mode for so long, your body doesn't know how to turn it off. Our job isn't to forget what happened. It's to teach your nervous system that the threat is over. It's to reestablish what safe feels like." It was hard work. It was unglamorous. It was me sitting in a chair, learning to breathe again. It was me admitting that I was furious with my father, not just Miranda. It was me finally crying for the girl who had to eat stale pastries in a parking lot, not out of self-pity, but out of a fierce, protective anger. The change was physical before it was mental. I was eating 3 full meals a day. I was sleeping 8 hours in a real bed. The tremors in my hands stopped. The constant dull headache I'd had for a year simply evaporated, and my grades, which had plummeted to C's and D's, shot back up. I was no longer fighting exhaustion just to stay awake in class. I was present. I was engaged. I found, to my surprise, that I still loved this. I still loved the logic of a well-designed space. Professor Martinez noticed. "It's good to have you back, Hart," he said, handing me a graded midterm. It was an A. "Your work, it has a new depth to it, a new focus." He handed me a flyer. "This might interest you. It's an independent study project, but it comes with a grant. The city is looking for proposals for a small, unused plot of land downtown. They want to create an urban healing space, a place of refuge in the middle of the concrete. I thought of you. A healing space, a place of refuge." The words resonated so deeply they almost hurt. "I'll do it," I said, my voice thick. I needed to do more. I looked up the North Star Shelter, a local organization I'd seen on flyers but had been too ashamed to go to when I was on the street. It was a drop-in center and short-term housing shelter for youth, ages 18 to 22, who were homeless or at risk, the exact demographic I had belonged to. I walked in to volunteer, my heart pounding. I expected to feel shame. Instead, I felt recognition. I saw the kid in the corner, his backpack clutched to his chest, his eyes darting around. I saw the girl pretending to read a book, her real focus on the charging outlet where her phone was plugged in. They didn't need my pity. They needed someone to see them. I didn't work in the office. I helped in the kitchen. I made sandwiches. I handed out clean socks. I didn't tell my story, but when I'd see one of them look at me with that specific hollow-eyed exhaustion, I'd just nod. "I see you. You're not invisible." I was telling Silas about the shelter one night, about the anger I felt that these kids had fallen through the cracks. "You get that from your mother," he said quietly, looking into the fireplace. "What, my work ethic?" "No," he said. "The passion for it. You know, she wanted to be a landscape architect." I stared at him. "What?" "No, she was a pianist. She worked part-time at a bakery. That's what she did," Silas said, his voice soft. "It's not what she was. She loved it. She had all these old sketches, designs for public parks, community gardens. She wanted to build spaces that made people feel whole. But then she met your father. He wanted a partner in Aurora, and Heartline was taking off, and she put the dream away." He looked at me, a sad, proud smile on his face. "She would be so incredibly proud of you, Noel. You're not just following her path, you're completing it." My education was happening outside of the classroom, too. My trust fund was no longer a mystery. Silas was a demanding teacher. "This is not a magic bank account, Noel," he said one Sunday evening, spreading printouts over his dining room table. "This is a tool, and you will learn how to use it and how to protect it." He was ruthless. He made me set up a real budget. He taught me the envelope method, not with physical cash, but with dedicated bank accounts, taxes, living expenses, tuition, savings. He made me set up an automatic transfer to an investment account. "Pay yourself first," he'd grumble. "Before the landlord, before the grocery store. You pay your future self first." He was also teaching me about my inheritance, Heartline Freight. "It's a good company," he said, "but your father ran it on instinct, not strategy. It's bleeding cash, and he never saw it. He didn't take it over. Instead, he'd hired a professional CEO, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sandra Polk. The numbers were already improving. Now you're going to learn what you own," he'd say, pushing a quarterly report toward me. "I don't care if you ever want to run it. You will know how to read its vital signs." He taught me the language my father never had: cash flow statements, inventory turnover, liabilities, freight contracts. I learned that Miranda's bridge loan had been covering up a massive hole Cade had created, siphoning money from the company's fuel accounts for his career. I was learning, painfully, that my father's greatest flaw wasn't malice. It was a willful, desperate ignorance. In the middle of this new structured life, the phone would ring. It was always Porter Shaw. "Just a reminder, Noel," he said, his voice brisk. "The 30-day clock is ticking. Miranda has filed for an extension. We denied it. Will she pay?" I asked, a knot tightening in my stomach. "People like Miranda don't believe the rules apply to them," he said. They think there's always another angle, another lie. The settlement was just the opening move. You're healing, that's good, but stay alert. Always have a plan B. He was right. I was healing, but I wasn't soft. I wasn't the girl in the car, but I hadn't forgotten her. I channeled all of it, the anger, the grief, the new knowledge, the old love, into my project for Professor Martinez, the urban healing space. And I knew exactly what I wanted to build. I went back to Silas's house. I dug through the attic, through boxes that hadn't been opened since my mother died, and I found them, her old sketchbooks. Tucked in the back was a beautiful, unfinished watercolor of a garden. It was a winding path lined with specific plants. It was a garden designed not just for sight, but for scent and touch and memory. I took her sketch. I scanned it. I used my software to render it in 3D. I kept her core design, her winding path, her choice of lavender and thyme, but I added to it. I added sheltered seating protected from the wind. I added a small, simple water feature, the sound a gentle balm. I added lighting that would make it feel safe even at dusk. I called the project the Memory Walk. I presented it to Silas on our next Sunday finance meeting, sliding the laptop over to him instead of a spreadsheet. He stared at the render. He zoomed in on the path, on the plants I had labeled. He recognized it. This, his voice was thick. This is her garden. It's our garden, I said. I'm building it for you in the backyard by the oak tree. He looked up from the screen, and for the first time I saw tears in my grandfather's eyes. He didn't say anything. He just reached across the table and put his hand over mine. It was the first step. We were building a healing space right here in the ruins of our old family. Graduation day was a blur of blue sky and black robes. I walked across the stage, my name echoing through the amphitheater, and the only person I looked for was in the third row, Silas. He was on his feet before my name was even fully announced, clapping so hard his face was beet red, a wide, uncharacteristic grin splitting his face. He wasn't a magnate in that moment. He was just a grandfather, bursting with a pride so fierce it was almost embarrassing. I graduated cum laude. The girl who had been failing classes, sleeping in her car, and fighting just to stay awake, had graduated with honors. Job offers came in from large, prestigious architectural firms in Denver and beyond. They offered impressive salaries, corner offices, and corporate expense accounts. They offered the kind of security I had once craved. I turned them all down. Instead, I took the small seed money Silas offered and filed the paperwork for my own business, Heartscape Studio. My office was the spare bedroom in my apartment. My business plan was simple, sustainable landscape design for clients who were usually overlooked. My motto was special rates, major impact. My first client was North Star Shelter. I redesigned their bleak concrete courtyard into a secure green space with raised garden beds and durable, comfortable seating. My second client was a nonprofit that developed low-income housing. I created beautiful, low-maintenance green spaces for them on a shoestring budget. It wasn't glamorous work, it was vital. I was building the kinds of spaces my mother had dreamed of, the kinds of safe havens I had so desperately needed. While I was building Heartscape, Sandra Polk was rebuilding Heartline Freight. The company under her professional management was thriving. She streamlined routes, renegotiated fuel contracts, and fired the half-dozen lazy or corrupt cronies Miranda had installed. The company's financials, once a mess of red ink, were now a neat, orderly column of black. 6 months after Sandra took over, a national logistics conglomerate made an offer to buy Heartline. It was a good offer, a generous one, enough that I could have sold it and lived comfortably for the rest of my life. You should take it, Sandra advised, all business. It's a clean exit, good for the portfolio. Silas was neutral. It's your decision, Noel. Your name on the door. I thought about it for a week. I thought about the smell of diesel and coffee on my dad's jacket. I thought about the company he had built, the legacy he had fumbled and Miranda had tried to steal. Selling it felt like letting her win, like letting her erase the Heart name from the one thing he had truly built. No, I told them, we're not selling. We're going to make it stronger. If I was going to keep it, I was going to protect it. I took a formal seat on the board of directors. My first act was to establish an internal audit committee with Sandra at its head. My second was to implement a new financial protocol, the 3-signature rule. Any expenditure over $10,000, any new loan, Any capital investment required 3 signatures: mine, Sandra's, and the CFO's. No exceptions. No single person would ever have unchecked control of that company again. My most important project, however, was internal. I hired the same tech consultant who had found the ghost ledger and gave him a new task: update, build a fortress. He created Sentinel. It was a custom-built software that integrated with our new accounting system. It did more than just track finances. It learned our patterns. It knew our average fuel costs, our payroll cycles, our maintenance schedules, and it was programmed to flag any anomaly, no matter how small: a transfer at an odd time of night, an invoice from an unrecognized vendor, a fuel charge that was 10% higher than the fleet average. Any deviation would trigger an immediate high-priority alert sent directly to me, Sandra, and Silas. We had taken the ghost from the machine and turned it into a guard dog. My education with Silas continued. The Sunday evening meetings were no longer just about my personal budget. He started walking me through Heartline's new internal reports, which Sandra had standardized to mimic a public 10K filing. "Forget the profit number for a minute," he'd say, pointing to a line item. "Look here, off-balance sheet liabilities. Has anyone at the company personally guaranteed a loan? Is the company on the hook if a supplier defaults? That's where the real monsters hide. That's how people lose everything, by not reading the fine print on a promise someone else made." He was teaching me to think like him, to see the risks hidden behind the numbers, to anticipate the next move. While I was building my life, Cade was trying to launch his. He finally released his first music video. It was an embarrassingly slick production, a cringe-worthy display of rented cars and models, all shot in his state-of-the-art studio, my studio. He posted it everywhere, bragging about his self-made success. The backlash was immediate and brutal. The local online forums and the comment sections of his videos were flooded. I don't know who started it. A neighbor who knew the story, a disgruntled former Heartline employee, but the truth, or at least a version of it, came out. Isn't that the studio he bought with his stepsister's stolen college fund? Self-made? My cousin worked at Heartline. His mom was looting the place for years to pay for this garbage. I heard they kicked the real daughter out, and she was living in her car while this clown was playing rock star. Justice for Noel. Cade tried to delete the comments, but they kept coming. His grand debut became a public relations nightmare. His career was DOA, drowned in a sea of public shame. He had the equipment, but his name was now toxic. And then the call I had been waiting for came from Porter Shaw. It was the 31st day. "She missed the payment," he said, his voice devoid of surprise. Her lawyer sent a letter citing unforeseen difficulties in liquidating real estate assets. "She's asking for a 90-day extension. She thinks she can still negotiate." "She does?" I said. It wasn't a question. "She does," Porter confirmed. "She thinks this is still a game. She thinks she can drag it out, wear us down, hide the money. She doesn't understand that the game is over." "What's our move?" I asked, my voice calm. "I've already made it," he replied. "I just filed a motion to enforce the settlement's acceleration clause as of 10 minutes ago. The full amount, $240,450, is now immediately due and payable. The 30-day grace period is officially over." The air in my small studio apartment felt charged, electric. This was it, the final act. "She will fight this," Porter warned. "She will file for bankruptcy. She will try to move assets. She will lie in court. The next phase won't be in a conference room, Noel. It will be in a courtroom. It will be public. Are you prepared for that?" I looked around my apartment. I saw my drafting table covered in plans for a new community park. I saw my Heartline quarterly report marked up with my own notes. I saw the framed photo of my mother on my desk. I was no longer the girl in the car. I was no longer the girl Miranda could throw onto the lawn. I had a business. I had a support system. I had a purpose. And I had a file cabinet full of evidence. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and hard. "I'm prepared. No more deals. No more negotiations." I was getting my money back. I was getting my company back. But this was no longer just about recovery. This was about a final, public, and legally binding reckoning. I wanted the last move to be a checkmate delivered in front of a judge with no possibility of escape. The 30-day deadline passed with the agonizing silence of a clock ticking down to an execution. On the 31st day, Porter filed the motion. Miranda's response, filed by a new, more expensive-looking lawyer, was exactly what Porter had predicted: a plea for an extension, a claim of inability to liquidate assets, a sob story about market conditions. She thought this was a negotiation. She didn't realize that for us, the settlement had never been the end goal. It had been a test she had just failed. "Now the real work begins," Porter said. We were in a new conference room, this one smaller, a dedicated war room. "We're past settlement. We are now in a full discovery phase for a court hearing. She's just opened the door for us to dig into everything." Sandra Polk, the new CEO of Heartline, was our inside woman. With Miranda's ownership stake now legally contested and frozen by the default, Sandra had full control. She and I were reviewing the implementation of the Sentinel system. "It's working perfectly," Sandra said, tapping at her laptop. "It's flagged 6 low-level invoice discrepancies, all legitimate. It's learning." "I want you to unleash it," I said. "Don't just have it monitor the present. I want you to feed it the past, all of it. Every transaction from the day Miranda Vale met my father. Let's see what the ghost ledger missed." For a week, the system churned. It cross-referenced old bank statements, invoices, and the newly acquired company credit card logs from the past 5 years. Then, at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, my phone lit up. It wasn't an alert, it was a report. Sentinel had found a pattern. It was a series of small, almost invisible payments, a $200 charge here, a $350 charge there, all coded as media services or digital marketing. They were small enough to fly under any human auditor's radar, but they were regular, and they were all going to one account: Blue Mesa Media. My blood ran cold. This was Cade's shell company, the one Miranda had used to siphon the $100,000 from my trust fund. But these payments weren't from my trust. They were from Heartline Freight's operating account, and the date, the first payment, was dated 3 years before my father's death. It was just 6 months after my mother had passed away. This wasn't an opportunistic theft by a widow. This was a long con, a predatory attack that had begun when my father was at his most vulnerable, a grieving widower. Miranda hadn't just stolen from me. She had been bleeding my father and his company dry from the very beginning. I called Porter before the sun was up. "It's worse than we thought," I said. The discovery changed the entire scope of the investigation. Alvarez, the forensic accountant, was brought back in. If she was stealing small, she was also stealing big, Alvarez said. Look for a major purchase in her name, or Cade's, around that time. It took them less than a day. 3 months after the Blue Mesa Media payments began, Miranda had put a down payment on a luxury vacation condo in Arizona. It was a $700,000 property. How? I asked. Even with what she was skimming, she couldn't afford this. She didn't, Porter said, his voice grim. She paid the $140,000 down payment from an account we can't trace, but the loan, the bank required a guarantor. He slid a file across the desk. It was the loan application, and on the last page, the guarantor agreement was a signature, Graham Hart. My father had personally guaranteed a $560,000 loan for his new girlfriend's vacation home, using Heartline Freight as the collateral. No, I whispered. He wouldn't. He was frugal. He hated debt. He would never have signed this. Look at it, Noel, Porter said quietly. I stared at the signature. It was his, the familiar strong loop of the G, the sharp H. It was perfect. It's too perfect, I said, a strange, cold realization dawning. I pulled an old birthday card from my wallet, one he had signed years ago. I held it next to the document. My card's signature was slightly messier, the T crossed with more energy. The loan signature was flawless, precise. It's an auto pen, Porter said, a machine-replicated signature. We had an analyst check the ink dispersal and pressure. It's a forgery, a high-end one. She didn't just ask him to sign it, she signed it for him. We now had a new theory of the case. This was not a simple breach of trust. This was a calculated multi-year conspiracy to defraud my father, seize his company, and disinherit his daughter. The updated will wasn't the start of the plan. It was the end game. Porter sent the private investigator back to my old neighborhood. The first doorbell camera was good, Porter told him, but I want every camera on every house on that block. Pull the archives for the 72 hours surrounding the date the new will was signed. The investigator found it. A different neighbor, 3 houses down, had a security camera pointed at their driveway, which happened to capture the side of my father's house. The footage was time-stamped 10 p.m., the night before the new will was signed at a lawyer's office. The video showed Cade's black muscle car backing into the driveway. For 20 minutes, Miranda and Cade made trip after trip, carrying document boxes, file cabinets, and what looked like old hard drives out of my father's home office. They were gutting his records, destroying the past, just hours before he signed a document that gave them his future. "Undue influence," Porter said, his voice ringing with conviction as he watched the footage. "She didn't just influence him, Noel. She isolated him. She forged his name, stole his money, and then systematically erased any document that could have contradicted her. She fed him a completely false picture of his own company's health, and then presented herself as its savior." The pieces were slamming into place. Silas, watching the video, suddenly went rigid. "Wait, the filter." Graham mentioned a filter. "What filter?" Porter asked. "After Lydia died," Silas said, "before Graham cut me off, he sent me an email. He was worried about his new setup. He mentioned Cade installing something to help his recording bandwidth. He said it was making his email act funny." Porter was on the phone to the tech consultant immediately. "Get back into that server. Look for mail server rules. Look for filters." They found it. A custom programmed filter had been installed on the Heartline mail server 18 months before Dad's death. It was set to automatically divert any incoming email from 2 specific addresses, Silas Whitmore and the company's longtime accountant. All their emails for over a year had been routed directly to a hidden spam tech folder that was set to auto-delete every 30 days. Cade hadn't been increasing bandwidth. He had been building a digital wall. He had cut my father off from his 2 most trusted advisors, blinding him. And then Silas's team found the smoking gun in a backup that predated the filter. An email from my father to the old accountant. "Tom," it read, "I'm updating the will with Miranda's kids in mind, but I need to make sure Noel is protected. I want a clause, ironclad, that she gets 50% of my Heartline shares immediately and becomes co-manager of the company with full signing authority on her 21st birthday. Let me know what you need." He had tried to protect me. He had tried, but the accountant's reply advising him to set up a separate protected trust was caught by Cade's filter. My father had been left alone, thinking his oldest advisor was ignoring him, while Miranda whispered in his other ear that she would take care of everything. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at a copy of that email, when my phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "It's Bri. Sorry. Mom is shredding documents in the garage. Cade is yelling about moving money to Nevada. They're planning to run. I can't be part of this. I can't let her ruin my life, too." My fingers trembled as I typed back. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "At a bus stop. I took something for protection. I made a copy of Cade's hard drive a year ago in case he ever tried to cut me out like he did you. It's all there. Meet me." I met her an hour later. She was a ghost, pale and shaking, clutching a backpack. She didn't look at me. She just pushed a single USB drive into my hand. "She's crazy," Bree whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "She said she'd rather burn the house to the ground than let you have it. Don't let her find me." She turned and ran, disappearing into the bus station. I drove straight to Porter's office. He put the drive into a secure, air-gapped laptop. It was a digital confession. The drive contained Cade's entire financial history, his browser logs, and a folder named Drafts. Inside were 4 different versions of my father's will. The first one was the original, matching Dad's email to his accountant, naming me as co-manager at 21. The next 3 versions showed Miranda's progressive edits, first making her a co-trustee, then the sole trustee, then finally, in the last version, giving her full ownership of Heartline. The drive also contained Cade's browser history, searches for Best AutoPen 2021, how to forge a signature digitally, how to beat forensic signature analysis, and finally, logs from Miranda's own accounts, showing the transfers from Blue Mesa Media into her personal checking. Porter Shaw looked at the screen, then at me, then at Silas. He picked up his phone. "We're done with discovery," he said to his team. "File an emergency petition with the court. We are seeking to invalidate the will in its entirety on the grounds of undue influence, conspiracy, and fraud. I want a temporary restraining order on all known assets of Miranda Vale and Cade Vale, including the Arizona property. I want a full asset seizure order, effective immediately. The order was granted by a judge at 3 p.m. The banks were notified. At 3:17 a.m., my apartment, Silas's study, and Sandra Polk's home office lit up at the same time. It was a sentinel alert, high-velocity withdrawal attempt detected. Account, M. Vale checking. Amount, $50,000. Destination, Apex Regional Bank, Reno, NV. A second later, alert, transaction failed. Account frozen by court order, TRO 4512. Another alert. A different account. Alert, high-velocity withdrawal attempt detected. Account, K. Vale, Blue Mesa Media. Amount, $25,000. Destination, unregistered crypto wallet. And the reply, alert, transaction failed. Account frozen by court order, TRO 4512. She had tried to run. She had tried to liquidate her assets and flee to Nevada, and the system we had built, the digital guard dog, had caught her in the act. Her last desperate attempt to escape was now a documented, failed transaction, a digital admission of guilt that was already on its way to the judge's inbox. Porter called me at dawn. She took the bait, he said, his voice alive with a cold, clear energy. Her attempt to flee just violated the restraining order. The hearing is set for next Tuesday. This won't be a settlement, enforcement Noel. This is a complete reversal. It's time to take it all back. The county courtroom was not a grand hall of justice. It was a functional, sterile box of beige walls and fluorescent lights, smelling faintly of old coffee and floor wax. But today it felt like an arena. We sat at the petitioner's table, me, Silas, and Porter Shaw, our files arranged in a neat damning line. Across the aisle sat Miranda. Her expensive suit was gone, replaced by a drab gray one. Her new lawyer looked harassed, and in the row behind her, looking like a cornered animal, was Cade. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Alvarez, peered down from the bench. Mr. Shaw, you have filed an emergency petition to invalidate a probated will on the grounds of undue influence and fraud and to enforce a defaulted settlement. This is an extraordinary request. Your burden of proof is high. We are aware, Your Honor, Porter said, standing, and we are prepared to meet it. The evidence is not circumstantial. It is absolute. For the next 2 hours, Porter built the case brick by brick. He was a surgeon, laying out the evidence with cold precision. First, the bank statements, the $100,000 siphoned from my trust, displayed on the courtroom's large screens. Breach of fiduciary duty, Porter's voice echoed. Next, the credit card statements, the handbags, the spas, the $10,000 for Cade's studio, conversion of trust assets. Then the doorbell camera video. The room was silent as we watched Miranda sell my mother's memories for $40. I saw a juror wince, theft, and profound emotional distress. Next, the forged signature. The signature analyst, a sworn expert, testified that the loan guarantee on the Arizona condo was a high-quality, non-contemporaneous autopen forgery. Finally, the email, my father's email, trying to protect me, naming me co-manager at 21, and the server logs showing the filter Cade had built to isolate him. This was not an act of poor judgment, Your Honor, Porter said. This was a multi-year systematic conspiracy. It began with the forgery of the loan, continued with the digital isolation of Mr. Hart from his advisors, and culminated in the fraudulent procurement of a new will, a will that granted the conspirator, Miranda Vale, full control of the assets she was already stealing. Miranda's lawyer did his best. Your Honor, my client was a grieving widow herself, trying to blend a new family. She was trying to protect the family's assets, Mr. Hart's company, in a volatile market. These were investments. Investments? The judge interjected, her voice sharp. Are you characterizing the purchase of a $2,800 handbag as an investment in Heartline Freight, Counselor? Before he could stammer a reply, Porter said, The prosecution calls Bree Vale to the stand. A small, quiet door at the back of the courtroom opened. Bree walked in, escorted by a bailiff. She was pale, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, but she was there. Miranda let out a small, strangled gasp. Cade just sank lower in his seat, his face ashen. Bree was sworn in. Porter's voice was gentle. Ms. Vale, can you tell the court who was in charge of the computers in your home? Cade, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Cade did everything. And did your mother ever ask him to do things to the company computers? Yes. Bree took a shaky breath. She was always complaining about noise, about the old man, Mr. Whitmore, and the accountant, Mr. Harris, always emailing my stepdad. She told Cade to make them go away. So he did. He built a filter. He called it the quiet box. He bragged that he could make anyone invisible. He was the one who set it all up so my mom could manage things. Manage things? Porter asked. That's what she called it, Bree said, looking at her hands. She said Noel was a child and Mr. Hart was too sad to make the right decisions. She said she was the only one smart enough to run the family. Thank you, Ms. Vale. No further questions. Miranda's lawyer tried. Bree, you're angry at your mother, aren't you? You two had a fight. Bree looked up, her eyes finally flashing with a spark of her mother's fire. I'm not angry, she said, her voice clear now. I'm terrified. I'm terrified of what she's capable of. I'm terrified of becoming her. What she did to Noel, it was wrong, and I'm not going to lie for her anymore. The room was silent. Bree was dismissed. Your Honor, Porter said, turning back to the judge, the evidence is clear. The will, dated October 14, 2021, is a product of fraud and undue influence. We ask that the court void that document in its entirety. We further ask that the court recognize the documented intent of the deceased, Mr. Graham Hart, by reinstating the prior draft of his will, dated September 1, 2021, which protects his daughter's inheritance and grants her co-management of Heartline Freight. Furthermore, Porter continued, his voice like a hammer, due to the defendant's default on the civil settlement and her clear, documented attempt to flee the jurisdiction, we ask for an immediate order seizing and compelling the sale of all assets belonging to Miranda Vale, including the home in Aurora and the condo in Arizona, to satisfy the $240,450 in proven damages, plus punitive penalties and all legal fees. We also ask that the permanent trusteeship of Ms. Hart's trust be transferred to Mr. Silas Whitmore, effective immediately. The judge looked at Miranda. Mrs. Vale, do you have anything to say? Miranda stood. Her composure was gone. She was shaking, her face blotchy. I did it for my family, she pleaded, her voice a high-pitched whine. Graham, he was losing the company. He was depressed. I was trying to save us. I was trying to save his legacy. Does no one see that? I did what I had to do. You did what you had to do for yourself, the judge said, her voice cold. What you did, Mrs. Vale, was prey on a grieving man. You isolated him. You forged his name. You stole from his daughter and you systematically looted his estate. The court finds your actions to be not just opportunistic, but predatory and malevolent. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Silas. I stood up and walked to the petitioner's microphone. I looked directly at Miranda. You can tear up my mother's pictures, I said, my voice low and clear, ringing through the silent room. You can sell her books. You can paint over the walls, but you can't tear up the truth. You can't erase her, and you can't erase me. As I finished, a loud electronic ding echoed through the courtroom. Everyone looked at the large screen. A new pop-up had appeared, an email notification forwarded by Porter's team. It was from Sentinel Alert at heartlinefreight.com. The subject line was simple, final report, seizure order enforced, and in the body, a list of transactions, all time-stamped from that morning as the judge's order was being executed. Failed withdrawal attempt, M. Vale $50,000 Apex Bank NV. Reason, TRO. Failed withdrawal attempt, K. Vale $25,000 unregistered wallet. Reason, TRO. It was a digital confession, a final futile attempt to run, broadcast for the entire court to see. Miranda's own digital ghost testifying against her. In the back row, Cade, seeing his crypto transfer fail, panicked. Turn it off, he hissed, half rising from his seat. Mom, tell them to turn it off. The court recorder's microphone, just a few feet away, picked up every word. The judge stared at Cade. The court recognizes Mr. Vale's attempt to instruct his mother to tamper with evidence. Bailiff, please note that for the DA's file. The judge picked up her gavel. Her face was granite. The court hereby rules the will of Graham Hart, dated October 14, 2020, 1, is declared null and void, as it is the clear product of undue influence and fraud. The court recognizes the prior draft, dated September 1, 2021, as the true and valid testament. All shares and rights described therein are hereby restored to Ms. Noel Hart. Gavel. The court orders the immediate and permanent removal of Miranda Vale as trustee. Trusteeship is transferred to Silas Whitmore. Gavel. The court grants the petition for full asset seizure and liquidation. A receiver will be appointed to sell the properties in Aurora and Arizona, with all proceeds to be used to make Noel Hart whole, followed by the payment of all punitive damages and legal fees. Gavel. The court refers this entire matter, including the actions of Miranda Vale and Cade Vale, to the district attorney's office with a strong recommendation for criminal prosecution on charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Gavel. This hearing is adjourned. It was over. It was done. Silas's hand squeezed my shoulder. I didn't cry. I just breathed. I watched as a court officer walked over to Miranda. She wasn't sobbing, she was just empty. The fight was gone. She was led out of the courtroom, not in handcuffs, not yet. But her freedom was over. She looked at me one last time, her eyes no longer filled with hatred, but with a horrifying blank understanding. She had lost completely. Porter turned to me, a stack of papers in his hand. He'd had them ready. "This," he said, handing me the top one, "is the court order. And this," he handed me a second, "is the shareholder action to formally reclaim your 50% ownership and your seat on the board, effective immediately." Right there in the courtroom, with the echo of the gavel still in the air, I took the pen Porter offered. I signed my name, Noel Hart, on the line. I closed the file. The screen on the wall went black. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm so glad I could share it with you. I'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on Noel's journey. Please don't forget to subscribe and like this video. And if this story resonated with you, hit that hype button to help it be heard by more people.